The weekly code quiz. Name 4 ways you can create a button using the type attribute for the input element. Input type button. Input type reset. Input type submit. Input type image. When creating an image button, what additional attributes are required? In order to load a custom image for a button, you use the source attribute to tell the browser where to find the image. We also use the alt attribute to describe the contents of our button for someone using an assistive device. You can add the style attribute to adjust the appearance of the button. What is the purpose of a reset button? The reset button will clear any response entered into our text input field. What attribute do you use to turn off any type of input button? The disabled attribute. If present, the button is off. Let's look at these in examples. H3 tag using the input element. H3 closing tag. Form opening tag. Label opening tag. For attribute equals image button in quotation marks, a custom image button : label closing tag. Input opening tag, type attribute equals image in quotation marks. ID attribute equals image button in quotation marks. Alt attribute equals sign up button. Source attribute equals assets/images/sign up button.png in quotation marks. Style attribute equals width: 100 pixels in quotation marks. Line break. Label opening tag, for attribute text input, enter a response. Label closing tag. Input opening tag, type equals text in quotation marks. ID attribute equals text input in quotation marks. Line break. Input type attribute equals reset in quotation marks. Line break. Input opening tag, type equals submit. Value attribute equals submit. Disabled. Form closing tag. This example shows an image button, a reset button, and a submit button. We are also showing you the use of the disabled attribute, which will turn off a button. An embedded style displays our image button at a particular size. What is another way to create a button? The button element, which has an opening tag and a closing tag. What is the default function of a button element if you do not specify it using the type attribute? A submit button. It is best practice to always include a type attribute when using a button element, even though entering something like button type equals button closing tag seems redundant. Here is an example using a button element instead. H3 opening tag using the button element, H3 closing tag, form opening tag, button opening tag, type attribute equals button in quotation marks. This button has no function. Button closing tag, line break, label opening tag, for attribute equals text input in quotation marks, and a response, label closing tag. Input opening tag, type attribute equals text in quotation marks, ID attribute equals text input in quotation marks, line break. Button opening tag, type attribute equals reset in quotation marks, reset, button closing tag, line break. Button opening tag, type equals submit in quotation marks, disabled. This button is disabled, Image opening tag, source attribute equals assets/images/sign up button.png in quotation marks. Style attribute equals width: 100 pixels in quotation marks. Button closing tag. Break. Form closing tag. Why create a button element if you can already create buttons using the input element? The reason the button element was created was to give developers more flexibility in the design of their buttons. Whatever is between the button opening tag and the button closing tag becomes part of the button. So this may include an image. It may include longer text than what would be appropriate for the value attribute when using the input element. The button type equals button option was created to give the developer flexibility on the function of a button as well. It is meant to be coupled with code, typically JavaScript, that defines its function. If no function is defined, it has no default behavior and will be clickable but do nothing. When should you use a button element over an input element? The input element has more cross-browser compatibility, so you may find button is not supported by older browsers. The button element is appropriate when you want to create a custom function or when you may want to create a custom grouping of elements to comprise your button for which the limitations of an input element are too constraining. Presented by Designers Learn Code.